Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Date in a Blink, where I'm joined by Christan Marashio, a certified coach, and as she's known online, the Dateology Coach. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain a bit. It's totally free, and Anchor will distribute the podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and lots of other podcasting platforms. Not only that, but it has creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. It also lets you make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make your podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. As listeners of Date in a Blink, you obviously love hearing about other people's dating lives. So check out Sticky Situations podcast. It's a podcast where guests come to spill their worst and most outrageous dating stories. Everyone struggles to find the one. So in the meantime, come listen to other people talk about their experiences to compare to yours. Hey, at least we can all look back and laugh, right? Check it out and see if your stories are also sticky situations. Christan Marashio is the Dateology Coach. She wrote the internationally read dating advice column, and That's Why You're Single, for 10 years before obtaining her coaching certification. She believes online dating has become traumatic for many singles, largely due to the overwhelming amount of disappointment, rejection, and anxiety that many daters can experience. Christian's goal is to educate people on not just traditional theories, but the science behind them. She also wants to dismantle misogynistic bro science theories regarding mating rituals and sexuality. The Oology and Dateology Coach refers to the different aspects of human behavior: psychology, sociology, and biology, to name a few. In addition to holding a bachelor's degree in communications from Emerson College, she received a coaching certification through the International Association of Trauma Recovery Coaching. Christan is based in New York City, but serves as a dating coach for single women across the globe. Christan, it's such a pleasure to have you on today. In one of your blog posts, you write about something called limerence. And I think most of us are familiar with the other two phases of romantic love that you mentioned, which are lust and attraction. But limerence is one that a lot of our listeners probably haven't heard of before. Can you explain a bit about what limerence is and what happens if a person overstays their welcome in that phase?
Limerence is when it's sort of like a very heightened form of a crush, where it's very unrequited. It's usually one-sided, and it's a go-to tool for people, especially avoidance, because it provides a safety. It makes you feel like there's that possibility and that hope, but without the risk. And that's the problem with if you stay in it too long, because then you become so comfortable. You build this comfort zone, and you become very afraid to step out of it. And it's sort of a limerence for a lot of people is a coping mechanism.
Is it sort of because you said it was like a crush, is it one that you might not be sharing with others, or do you think that even when you share it with others, you could still be in that phase?
I think it could. I really think it could be either, but I think more often than not, it's one-sided.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I the example I can think of for myself is I had this huge crush on a guy at my gym, and we would talk whenever we would take classes together, and he would sit on the bike next to me, and he didn't wear a wedding ring, but I knew he had kids, and I so enjoyed the build up, the looking forward to seeing him, the talking, the chatting. I so enjoyed that part that I did not want to confirm whether or not he was married.
Mm-hmm.
And he never spoke of a wife, but I knew he had kids and he didn't have a ring. But there was something that I was like, oh, there's something not right there.
Mm-hmm.
But I never wanted to confirm it because I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the crush.
Mm-hmm.
But I that lasted for months.
And do you think by default it has to be something that holds you back, or do you think that that's, it's okay to have that crush if that's something you're enjoying? And
I think it's perfectly okay as long as it doesn't become a coping mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because it's always good to have a crush. It's always, everyone talks about their work crush and their gym crush. And gym crush is a great motivation to get to the gym, right? So it's good when you're using it for something productive.
Right.
But when you're using it as a way to detach or disconnect,
Mm-hmm.
right, from human interaction or human connection, that's when it might be maladaptive.
Got it. That makes sense. And another thing you mentioned in that post is that you're not a huge fan of women being the ones to ask men out. And I'm wondering why that is, because it can be really stressful for anyone to do, a man or a woman, or, non-binary, whatever people identify as. But if you're feeling gutsy, why not go for it, regardless of whether or not you identify as a woman?
There's a couple of reasons why I'm against this, and the main one is that women, we have to be more discerning. We have to vet. We have to be more careful because of our personal safety. So we're not typically just accepting a date with anybody, right?
Right.
Like, we don't typically just go out with anyone, even just because they ask. Whereas men, they don't carry the same burden
Mm-hmm.
of needing to vet. They don't have that threat to their safety.
Mm-hmm.
So they can be like, yeah, sure. And because we're typically more discerning, we assume that if that guy says yes, we assume that they're saying yes for the same reason we would, which is we think there's real potential here. And more often than not, guys are saying yes because they're like, maybe I'll get laid out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the main reason, is because I think we approach it differently. Whereas women, when they don't just go out with anybody that asks, they're much more choosy.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think men are, because they don't have the same burden of personal safety.
So I have two follow-up questions for you. The first being, so it sort of sounds like it's, an added filter. Does that sound right? Like a filter for somebody who, instead of you having to approach them, they're approaching you, which gives you, I don't know, more information or something else. Is that accurate?
When you say an added filter, meaning if a guy is the one that asks you out, that means they're probably more interested?
That or whatever else in terms of safety that it might mean that they're asking you rather than you asking them.
I do think that it is an added layer, yes. But the other reason, and you said you had some follow-up questions before I get to my second reason why I don't like it.
Okay, so my second reason is, what if it's somebody that you've known for a long time and you've kind of been friends and flirty, and for whatever reason, maybe one of you hasn't asked the other, whether the timing hasn't been right or something like that. So the safety concern maybe not as prevalent in that scenario. Is that something that you'd still potentially be opposed to for, I don't know, one of the other reasons? So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that scenario.
No, that's a case of absolutely not, because if you guys are friends and there's this comfort level, there's not as much fear of rejection. I'm just going to go to the old adage, if he wanted to, he would. And I don't believe when people say, well, maybe he doesn't want to ruin the friendship. It's that scene in Sex and the City where was it Miranda's talking about the date and the guy wouldn't come up for the second date, and Berger, and this was really the only worthwhile thing Berger did the whole time. And his whole arc is when he was like, yeah, he's just not that into you. And they were all like, what are you talking about?
From a first to second date, that totally makes sense. But in that initial phase where it's sort of like this is just, scenarios you might see where like the guy might be like, intimidated because the woman, let's say, is super beautiful and she dates all these really attractive men. And let's say he's like kind of a nerdy guy, just like, silly. Again, I'm just pulling kind of a scenario you might see in the media. It might not be that they don't want to ruin the friendship so much as they don't think they have a shot.
I'm just not for it.
Yeah.
I just think if they want to, they would. Yeah. We do all kinds of things that intimidate us.
This is true.
Right?
This is very true. Women do a lot.
We do all kinds of things.
Right. And you said there was another reason. I'm curious what it was.
Well, the other reason is, we hear all the time men like the chase. And I don't think it's that men love the chase or the thrill of the chase. I think men prefer to be the pursuer, because if a woman is pursuing them, I think men wonder or assume that means men are not pursuing her. If that makes sense. Men like to be the one. Men want to go. It's not that they like the chase; it's that they want to go after women who are in demand by other men.
Got
And
it.
so if a woman, and women ask all the time, what if I'm just looking for something casual or hookup? I always say, don't just come out with it, because a lot of men don't trust that,
Mm.
because they're going to wonder, and here we go, where sort of it's the opposite, where men say, it's so easy for women to get laid. I know how easy it is. So if they're coming to me, that must mean guys, they don't have any options. It just means that they're probably having trouble.
Interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that it makes men wonder, well, why does she have to come to me? If she's great, men will be after her. Because, and this is why I say, if he wanted to, he would. I think that when men recognize that there's someone that they really like and that there's real potential, I think in most cases they're taking that risk. To quote Jack Berger, they're coming upstairs, they're booking that second date.
Right. It's like just the whole concept of he's just not that into you. If he
Right.
is, you'll be his.
Right.
Yeah. He'll make the effort. You'll know. Yeah. So another thing that you mentioned in one of your blog posts is something called a future fake. I'm actually wondering if you could start by explaining it, and then I have some follow-up questions for you.
Future faking is a tool that very toxic and manipulative people use to expedite emotional and then eventually physical intimacy. And they talk about things you're going to do in the future, and future dates. And again, to use the Sex and the City reference, the we guy, we're going to do this and we should do this, and they're talking about that on the first or second date. And they're doing that to make you feel like, to build a false sense of security, so that you're going to be easier to manipulate, and that you'll become more attached and more invested.
Mm-hmm. And I think
So
hearing that, I think a lot of people who are active in the dating space have probably experienced this at least once, if not more. I'm wondering if you have any tips on how we can see it for what it is and when we're in that moment, because it can be really easy when you're looking at a friend scenario, but it can be a little harder when you're in it yourself.
I mean, I think that if you were to ask yourself, if you were in any other situation and some random person that let's say you were just meeting some random person at a party, platonically, and they started talking to you about all the things you're going to do together, you would probably be like, whoa, hold up.
Right.
Ask yourself how you would be reacting if this wasn't a romantic situation. Ask yourself, what's your baseline? It's so important to establish a baseline, meaning what is your normal? What is the typical that you deal with?
Right.
And when something strays from that baseline, and sometimes things do, I'm talking, not a minor stray. I'm talking, that little chart thing on the graph, if you're, it goes really far off to the side. That's what you have to watch out for. Always know your baseline. And if it strays from your personal baseline, it's probably off.
So to piggyback off that, reading through your posts more generally, there are some trends like, future faking, serial dating, schmoozers, sweet talkers, and it works. People are able to trick others into thinking that they like them. And so I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on why we go to these lengths to convince ourselves that somebody who isn't into us, and, in the context of a platonic relationship, it would be obvious, why in the romantic context we're so kind of set on convincing ourselves that they're interested.
Well, I think if we're talking women who are dating men, there's so much that goes into this. Like anything with human behavior, there's three real factors that determine human behavior: biological, environmental, and psychological. And as women, we are told from a very young age, male validation is very, very important. And that if you don't have somebody, if you're single, you don't have the same level, you have no value. And so that's part of why women stay invested in these things, because we're told without this thing, we don't have any value. And so there's that's sort of psychological and environmental, right? So we're also told women are constantly being made responsible for the success or failure of a relationship. A man can cheat on his partner, and if he's married to a woman, a man can cheat, and you have no idea how many people will be like, oh, what'd she do? What happened? Oh, she must not have been sleeping with him.
Right.
Oh, she must have been this. Or it's always put on her.
Right.
We're always the ones who are told that we're responsible for a relationship. So we feel like we have to stick in it. And then the other thing is, we're almost, no, society does not want us to listen to our intuition, because if we do, then we're going to realize men are bullshit and we don't need them. So what they're going to do is tell you every single time you feel like something's off or something isn't right. What do we always hear? Well, you're being too picky. Well, you know what? Why don't you give them a chance? So we have that conditioning rolling around in our head and embedded and ingrained. And we're thinking, oh, maybe we're being too picky. Maybe this, maybe that. There's so much that goes into this. It's not as simple as, oh, you just don't love yourself.
Right.
No, that's reductive. There's so much more that goes into why we stick around. And then there's biological. It's the oxytocin, and we've formed a bond. And especially if it's a toxic relationship, if there's that unpredictability where they ghost for a few days and then they come back, you're producing far more dopamine in situations like that, and you become dependent on that rush. And so, you've got the oxytocin, which makes you more trusting and lowers your inhibitions. Then you have the dopamine that's being produced in really large amounts, and you become dependent on it. So it's so layered. It's not as simple as, why don't you love yourself?
So do you think there's anything that we can do? Because obviously there's the portion where we can say, okay, if this were a platonic situation, how would I perceive it? But things like, the oxytocin and all of these kind of chemicals in our body, and those are harder to control. So do you have any tips for how we might be able to extract ourselves from those things and kind of take that more logical approach so that we're not getting impacted by these layers on layers and putting ourselves in a bad situation?
Well, value your time. That's the first thing. Value your time and treat this person like the stranger that they are. And that means don't, a lot of people with these with dating apps, they text for days and weeks before they meet. And that's where you become invested, and you can become attached. You can form a bond through, shared experiences and talking. So you become so invested that you become tunnel vision. You turn off the other options, and you only look at this one person. Whereas if you were to space out the dates, don't be in constant communication until you meet, set up that date and then be like, great, I'll confirm the day of the date. And then that's it. Radio silence. Don't be chatting with them before the date. Right. Be focusing on yourself and do your own thing. And then you have the date, set up another date. Great. Minor communication, build it in increments, right, so that you avoid getting invested, because when you have that distance, not only are you giving those brain chemicals time to level off and normalize so that you don't have the rose-colored glasses on, but it's a way to manage your investment and attachment so that you're not as likely to stick it out.
It also sounds sort of like just compartmentalizing it, so it's not taking over the rest of your life potentially, which, as somebody who does that with just everything in my life, it sounds very wise and logical.
Yes, that's what I would say to do. Compartmentalize.
Awesome. So now moving on to the date between Katy and Eric, I'm wondering if there's anything you thought that went particularly well on their date, and if so, what it was, or if not, what do you think could have been better?
I was just talking about sort of initial conversations when we're first talking with somebody. And there was, I don't know if you saw the TikTok where the woman she made a match on Bumble, and she said, oh, what sort of data do you noodle in? And he said, well, I do analytics for the VA, and I'm also something like a Marine something. And so it works out. And then he says, how was your weekend? And she got very upset that he didn't immediately dive into, well, tell me about your interest in, because I guess she mentioned it in her profile.
Right.
And what I thought was funny was she's talking about his poor communication skills while at the same time sort of admitting she completely ignored the cue he was giving her, which was, I don't want to talk about my job. That's who, nobody wants to talk about that. And for all you know, like he can't really talk about it. But I think.
But was it that? Because if she was upset about him not asking her about herself based on what's in her profile, it's not even a about his work. It might be that he doesn't want to talk about work in general, but maybe
Right.
she was upset that he just wasn't expressing interest specifically in her and was using sort of a generic prompt of, how was your weekend?
Right. But that generic prompt, sometimes, see, those questions are safe.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a way to see, it's a way to ease out of a conversation
Mm-hmm.
where that isn't as sort of sudden.
Mm-hmm.
I think when he just said, how was your weekend? Maybe it just didn't occur to him. Maybe he just doesn't know what to say. Not everybody has the same communication style.
Right.
Not everybody is good with that stuff. And we also have to take into account there are people with serious anxiety who might be neurodivergent, who might struggle with this kind of small talk.
Mm-hmm.
And I by no means saying, but what about the men? I mean, if you know anything about me, my whole thing is fuck that guy. It's not about. This goes for men and women. We're not everybody is good at this stuff,
Right.
And as I was listening to this to the date, she was doing most of the talking,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's what we do, and we do it because we fear the silence
Mm-hmm.
instead of just like asking a question, getting the response, providing an affirming statement as a response that is not a question, and that typically prompts a question. And what I noticed listening to this was Katy was really dominating the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
and there's nothing wrong with that. Now, are they
Mm-hmm.
allowed to stray from to a different topic?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's just meant, and we tell them beforehand, we give you a question to help, but if you don't want to answer it, you don't have to.
Hmm.
So they can totally stray from the prompt.
Yeah, see, they jumped right in, and I think that was part of the problem. There was no warm up.
Mm.
Like anything else, whether it's exercise, whether you're about to sing, you have to do a warm up.
Mm-hmm.
So that warm up of like, hey, she did ask, how did you hear about this? Great question, because
Mm-hmm.
it's a commonality. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why you get questions like that, like, oh, how are you how you how are you doing how are you enjoying these apps? It's
Mm-hmm.
safe, it's a commonality. And then you build from that. And it's those initial conversations, they're about building rapport.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we come at them, and by we, I mean men and women, we come at them differently. Men come at it more about building rapport, and women come at it vetting because we have to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where the disconnect is.
Got it.
So and that's why women want to ask questions. Men aren't really the question. They don't do questions. They learn about people through observing.
Mm.
You
So
know,
what
w-
are? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, women are much better at social recognition because we have to be. So that part of our brain, it develops, it gets a little bit bigger. There's more of a capacity for it. Whereas men struggle with reading social cues,
Mm-hmm.
and they struggle. There have been studies that show that men, they're um like they lose their ability. They struggle with social recognition when talking to women.
Mm-hmm.
Do it a lot, right?
It needs to be some sort of class as we grow up on how to have these interactions in a healthy way.
That would not be a bad idea.
Yeah.
It really wouldn't be a bad idea. So I think you need to start those conversations with like, hey, Eric. And again, like, did you have a good weekend? Oh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I did. Oh, what'd you do? Oh, my brother and I, we did this. And then, we went to this place. Oh, I love that place. They have great this. Do you see what I mean? And it builds
Mm-hmm.
instead of jumping right in.
I do agree with that in the context of like in like a synchronous conversation, like being
Uh-huh.
on a phone call. But I feel like in text, it can be a lot harder to like feel inspired to answer a text. I mean, let's say you have 20 in your inbox and 50% of them are, how are your weekend? How was your weekend? It can feel a little less like you're actually getting to know someone. And I think the warm up, so I guess I'm curious your perspective on like, do you think it how we get to those commonalities varies based on the medium that we're using?
No,
Mm-hmm.
no. I think that this is just basic communication.
Mm-hmm.
When how do you start a conversation with somebody? You start with something safe. You start
Mm-hmm.
with someone where you have common ground. that you can build off of. You don't ask them some random question where you don't, and because you want to be able to control the conversation. You don't know where the conversation's going to go,
Mm-hmm.
right? So in the beginning, it's just about sussing out, okay, how is this conversation going to go? What's okay to ask? You have to be able to troubleshoot that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to just pay attention. And even when you're messaging with somebody, the little cues that you can look for, how many words are they using? Are they matching your communication style or effort? And it's not just about, are they asking you questions? What you want to look for is effort. Are they trying to build rapport with you? That's what matters in those initial messaging stage. Just establish rapport, then get to the phone or the video chat, then start maybe vetting a little bit. And then on that first date, it should be a progression, I think.
Mm. Okay. And then in terms of potential takeaways from the date that you feel like might help other daters, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
I mean, I would just say that to not fear that silence.
Mm-hmm.
Don't
It's a
fear the
good one.
silence. The silence is going to tell you everything, whether it's in person or online, because when they answer that question that you ask and you reply with a, "Oh my God, that sounds amazing," that's going to prompt them to say something, and they're either going to say something or they're going to abandon the conversation. But
Mm-hmm.
if you're constantly dominating the conversation, you don't know if they're engaging you because they actually want to talk to you or because you're pushing this conversation along. So
Right.
don't fear the silence.
I like that. It's an interesting thing because I think we fill the silence in romantic and non-romantic contexts. And I think
Hmm.
I remember in law school, I didn't take negotiations classes, but I remember a lot of my classmates talking about how if you're in a negotiation, don't fill the silence. See what other people come out and say. And it's sort of the same context or same concept because you get to learn a lot by how other people fill the silence. I'm just thinking about it in other places. And I think it's a good piece of advice no matter what context we're in.
Don't give it all away, right? You want to play everything close to the vest.
So if Katy and Eric met in person, what pieces of advice might you give them to keep the momentum going?
Uh, I would lighten the conversation up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe honestly, what I love to do, like on a first date, especially with, and this is a great online thing. My boyfriend and I did this over COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Where are these online escape rooms? Do
Mm.
something where you can maybe work as a team,
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to learn a lot about something. Like try to sort of multitask. Try to do something where you're going to be able to observe their behavior.
Mm-hmm.
But again, warm. Let follow each other's lead and pay attention,
Mm-hmm.
and get a sense of, are they nervous? Okay, I'm gonna maybe not ask so many questions, or I don't want to overwhelm them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just I just watch for the social cues, follow their lead, lighten things up a little bit. Um, it, Again, it's that don't fear the silence.
Yeah.
You
So I
know.
have the $1,000,000 question for you. Date in a blink. What did you think? Did they match? And why do you think they did or didn't?
I don't think they did. I get the sense that they might be differing personality types. Like she seems a little bit more extroverted. He seems a little bit more introverted, which sometimes that can work.
Right.
To me, it just seems like they didn't have the same personality style. They just didn't seem to mesh well to me.
Yeah. So they did actually match. I don't know what happened after. Neither of them shared anything beyond, the feedback we got in their survey.
Hmm.
But they matched after the date, and
Hmm.
they both liked the experience. They enjoyed that they were able to kickstart the conversation a little bit more than if they were on a traditional dating app. So as we wrap up, a question we like to ask all of our experts is whether you have any final words of wisdom or advice for our audience.
Value your time.
Mm-hmm.
That's something we are not as women encouraged to do. Think about it. Just getting ready for a first date, how much time do we put into that?
Mm-hmm.
Between the hair, getting our hair done, and maybe doing our nails, and sometimes you go shopping and doing your makeup. We're talking 3-4 hours. Do you know
Right.
what you could do in 3 or 4 hours that can increase your earning potential? You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
value your time.
Right.
And match the time. And granted, men are just like jeans, shirt, done, got
Mm-hmm.
it. And I'm not saying that you only have to put in 15 minutes of effort, but I am saying don't go overboard on first dates.
Right.
Value your time. Let them earn your time.
I like that. So thank you for all of your advice and for joining today. As my final question, how can our audience get connected with you?
Oh, okay. You could follow my podcast, which is Dateology Coach Podcast, on Instagram at DateologyPod, or you can follow me personally at the Christan M, TheChristanM, or you can follow me on TikTok at Dateology Coach, or join my Substack, which is dateologycoach.substack.com. You get weekly podcast episodes, free monthly dating advice Zoom sessions, and dating advice posts.
Awesome. And I'll put all of that in the show notes so it's easily accessible for folks. And yeah, thank you again for joining me today.
Thank you for asking me. This was fun.
That's all we've got for you today. Shoot us a message on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at TheBlinkDate or at DateInABlink to let us know what you think. If you want to try voice-first speed dating from the comfort of your home, download the Blink Date app today. You can also sign up to participate in Date in a Blink by visiting our website at www.theblinkdate.com. In the meantime, thanks for joining us for this episode. We hope you enjoyed listening and look forward to talking with you again next time.